Brenna Zoomer, I was wondering how people really feel while being audited. From what I've heard about the repetitive processes, it sounds kind of awful to me. So do people get bored, feel trapped, feel like they're going crazy? I've heard they can go into a trance state. So do you sort of, quote unquote, lose consciousness a lot? Do you feel like it basically turns you into a kind of robot or a slave mentally? Or is it possible to come out of hours of auditing with your real self still basically intact? I'm just curious about the psychological state it creates. Okay, Brenna, thank you for this. And yes, it definitely does. Auditing of almost any nature does induce trance states. That is a part of the thing, especially repetitive processes. So auditing, let me say, as I've mentioned before, auditing is a lot of different things. There's a lot of different kinds of auditing or auditing processes. You have objective auditing and subjective auditing. And objective auditing or objective processes are the kind where you are sort of keeping your eyes open, being aware of your environment, touching things, moving around, locating things in space and time, and that sort of thing. Like, it's very objective. It has to do with objects and the physical world and your relationship to it. Whereas subjective auditing, is asking you questions of a recall nature or having you relive past experiences and going back and going over and over them, like in Dianetics, or finding a chain of incidents that have, one incident closer to the present and then an earlier similar time and an earlier similar time back in these what are called chains of incidents, earlier similars, until you get to the bottom of the chain, the most early incident involved, and that's the basic on the chain. And the idea is that when you get to that and you go through the process of reliving it or recounting it or recalling it, then it blows the power of that whole chain of incidents that were relying on this basic incident, holding them all in place. This early traumatic episode, whether it was early in this life or way back on the time track, millions or billions of years ago, and you've been carrying it around and similar incidents like it for centuries and millennia. The idea is you get down to that basic and you recount it, and all the energy and trauma and stress connected with all of it is gone. You erase it and it's no longer there. Or you release it where it's not erased, but it's so far gone from you that it's never, it's not going to come back anytime soon. So that's the basic explanation of what auditing is trying to do on a session by session, process by process basis. And I wanted to say all that because I wanted to be clear on what Scientologists believe is the goal of auditing, what they're trying to accomplish, and why they believe that it was almost required that you go into a trance state and that you're going to be, going through various shades of unconscious states. Levels of awareness, you're going to be falling asleep. You're going to be what's called in Scientology boil off is what they call it, where you're yawning and, falling asleep. And it's all just, and you're running through this session and you're trying to recall these incidents, but you can barely keep your eyes open. Sometimes people just pass all the way out. I have seen that happen. I have had that happen to me. So I've experienced both of these things from the auditor and from the pre-clear side, where I'm sitting there, passed out in the chair. And sometimes, and the auditors, depending on the kind of auditing they're doing, will treat boil off or dope off or this unconsciousness that sets in sometimes in different ways, depending on which auditing they're doing. But regardless of whether they're going to pay attention to it or not, they've got to get the pre-clear through it. So that's why sometimes sessions can take hours and hours, is because you got to go through all this nonsense with these unconscious states. And the idea with this is, I'm not going to sit here and try to explain in psychological terms exactly what's going on there, because I think there's a lot of different things going on there. You have a disassociation, you have false memory syndrome being implanted right there as it's happening in the session. This person is creating or is having created for them by the auditor, mostly indirectly, but still it happens. Totally imaginary incidents, things that never happen to the person, including all of the stuff about past lives. Now, you can believe whatever you want to about past lives, but I'm going to insist that there is no such thing as past lives when it comes to Scientology auditing, and that is not a recall of past life incidents that has any degree of validity. There's no evidence that what they are doing has any factualness to it at all. But Scientologists believe it, and it's a real testament to the power of belief, how seriously Scientologists take it and how deeply they're willing to go in an auditing session in order to discharge these traumatic episodes in their past. Okay, so this is why they will go along with it. And so you ask, do people get bored, feel trapped, feel like they're going crazy? All of the above and more. I have seen and heard of some of the wildest stories of what people get up to in an auditing session, where pre-clears have gone into a different personalities. They stood up on a desk, and I heard one session where the auditor was sitting there and the guy stood up, got up on the table, and started making these motions like he was cutting the auditor with a sword. I mean, wow, right? Here's the guy like standing there, and you're like, okay, now I got to get you to sit back in the chair and get through this process, and here we go. And that's as wild as things can get. You have pre-clears who will get up and try to leave. They feel very uncomfortable. Sometimes, like ridiculously so, the auditor will just ignore everything the guy's saying, shove him back in the chair, and force him to get through the process. And that's really the point where Scientology or Dianetics auditing becomes really abusive and traumatizing in itself. That is something you would not see done in in any psychologist's office or psychiatrist's office. You shouldn't be sitting there trying to engage in CBT or talk therapy or Freudian analysis or any kind of therapy. And when you want it to stop, the person forces you bodily to continue. That is wrong. There's a certain degree of discomfort anybody will feel in a therapeutic session where, the counselor or therapist might need to encourage the person to, look at some stuff that's a bit rough about their life. And certainly if they're still willing and the counselor's still willing, you want to do what you can. But this Scientology stuff takes that. It doesn't care what the pre-clear, the patient is doing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much you beg, plead, borrow, cry, whatever. You're stuck in that auditing session until that auditor says you're done. And that is not therapy at all. That's just trauma. That's just trauma-inducing nonsense. So yes, all of those things that you asked about do happen, and lots of other things, because you're putting people into some pretty weird headspaces through the course of doing this, especially, like I said, when you get into past lives and you start asking people about having blown up planets and committed genocide and things like that. Very, very serious, criminal activity that somebody is even in a past life, where everybody's dead, it's all gone, it's all in the past, yet here's this person thinking they're responsible for that stuff. And they never did any such thing. They weren't even alive at the time, So that itself is its own form of awful. So anyway, all of this together, I guess I'm just sort of giving you all my, sort of thoughts as they're coming here, because I'm recalling my auditing as I'm sitting here answering this question. I haven't been in an auditing session, I think, in, I guess it's been 8 years now. And don't miss it at all. Nope. Very, very happy to not be in that process. So there's a lot of different ways that different pre-clears will approach auditing. So this is why I'm sort of speaking in these general terms and not getting too specific or too anecdotal about individuals, and what they go through, because it's such a broad range of experience. Some pre-clears go into an auditing session and they're just very matter of fact and they just do what they need to do and they answer the questions and they don't put a lot of thought or effort into it and they just want to kind of get through it. Other pre-clears come in and they are all about learning everything they can about themselves and their past, and they're very into the auditing and they're very into figuring things out and they want to go down every pathway possible. And such pre-clears, of course, are very time-consuming and very imaginative. So that and everything in between. So it is expected, by the way, that all of these kind of reactions will happen. It actually would be a bit odd if somebody just came in, started getting auditing, bang, 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 just answered all the questions, racka, never had any sort of trance-induced state, never had any kind of unconsciousness, boil off, slip off, anything like that. You would start wondering as the case supervisor over time, if somebody was that they would call it running shallow. The guy runs very shallow. He doesn't go very deep. So that was the language or terminology used by the case supervisors in evaluating pre-clears. You wanted them to go deep, but you didn't want them to go too deep. You wanted to kind of get through the sessions and get to a good result, and you wanted the person interested and willing to plow in. But you didn't want these guys who were so into it that they just couldn't wait to, fall asleep in the chair and they have these 8-hour sessions where most of the time the auditor's just sitting there looking at this guy, passed out. So you get a lot of different range of experiences there. And at the end of the day, I think, given the fact that this is all sort of pseudoscientific amateur hour when it comes to actual therapy, you would expect that you would get this broad, varied multiplicity of experiences because while Hubbard goes on about how it's standard tech and it's the same processes for everybody, what those processes do to people can be quite different from one person to the next. So anyway, I hope that was informative for you.